the areas, because I find this is, I mean, Philip Johnson highlighted this back in his, you know, prime. This is the real issue. It's really supernaturalism versus theism. There's a point I wanted to make, and I just wanted you to sort of elaborate on this. So when we go back to Darwin's idea of natural selection, he originally was inspired by artificial selection, what human beings were doing. So obviously there's design there that he's using within his toolbox. And then later on, we have people like Francis Crick, who, you know, when they can't explain design, they are referring to supernatural, well, not supernatural design, design of aliens, you know, panspermia. So it seems inescapable that even when trying to come up with a naturalistic theory, you still have to flirt around with design in some way, in a way that's not naturalistic.
You're right. And next time, I'll actually discuss this with a couple of examples where what ends up happening is a kind of faux designer, to use the French adjective, right, is employed, where natural selection, for instance, is given all kinds of intentional properties.
Yeah.
Or you often see the use of verbs in evolutionary biology, such as co-opt, reuse, repurpose, because the actions of choice or election or discrimination, where you're discriminating outcomes with respect to some goal, are inescapable. Those verbs of action and intent are inescapable, and the theoretician ends up re-importing the teleology and the mind-based concepts that he thought he had thrown away. But he has to use them, right? Because frankly, my view is that the evidence in question just calls out for that.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that when I read really thoroughgoing people like Alex Rosenberg, thoroughgoing philosopher of science, philosopher of biology, who, you know, claim to be hardcore materialist reductionists, even those people find that they can't escape these notions of purpose, intent, goal directedness, and so forth. So I totally agree with you, Subor.
Yeah.
And my view is, you know what? If you're going to do it anyway, why don't you jettison the rule, and then you won't be a hypocrite about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you refer to Rosenberg. What's interesting about him, even though he's a self-labeled mad dog naturalist, he still has to not only, like you said, flirt with these words in his writings and those of others, philosophers of science, philosophers of biology, and evolutionary biologists. It's very hard not to deify natural selection. You know, so there was this intent, there was this foresight, there was this goal, and like you said, co-opt and other words that they actually use. What's interesting is when people like Nagel, who, you know, by any stretch doesn't have a religious bone in his body, he writes in Mind and Cosmos that, you know, this idea that all of life evolved in a naturalistic way and it's all can be explained without reference to anything supernatural is simply hard to believe, right? And the environment, the way that he describes it in academia, is that people have been browbeaten into submission rather than actually engaging with the evidence. And what I find interesting is that this box, this example that he gave of Leibniz box, which is, you know, essentially you don't want to throw away something you may need later. Darwinists are still not really throwing away the concept of design. They're just not allowing the theists or the intelligent design proponents to say we're going to use it for something else. They can say yes, we're going to use it in our limited space and put it back, but we're not going to allow you guys to use it.
Right. And I think the challenge that the intelligent design theorist faces is to make design sufficiently powerful and attractive that its explanatory value or its predictive value, ultimately, I would love to see intelligent design making bold predictions that lead to knowledge, that that people will say, you know, forget about methodological naturalism. Those guys are discovering all this cool stuff. I'll try those ideas out for myself. And let's see where that might go. And I don't know if I believe in God, and all of that's a separate question, but boy, they discovered X or they discovered Y, and that was so cool and interesting. I'll try those ideas for myself and give that theory a chance. And, ultimately, I think that's where we need to go. But before we get there, I'm campaigning for consistency in the philosophical rulemaking.
Yeah.
Right. The great thing about rules in sports is they apply to both teams.
Yeah.
The one set of rules in chess applies to the white pieces and the black pieces, right? And it really bothers me to see someone like, Jerry Coyne, right? Say, you have to eliminate theology, except I'm going to use it in my book on evolution.
Yeah.
One set of rules for everybody.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned Coyne, because I still have the tab open. I was actually reading an article on his site, because he's very adamant about challenging methodological naturalism. What's interesting is there's actually, I'll send this to you. I'm sure you've seen it anyway before. There's a response on this site to a paper written in 2012, which is labeled "Grist to the Mill of Anti-Evolutionism, the Failed Strategy of Ruling the Supernatural Out of Science by Philosophical Fiat." So in this interesting article, I think these guys are atheists. They basically argue against methodological naturalism, and here he's challenging them. What's interesting is that when people like Coyne and other hardcore Darwinists, they are essentially telling us that intelligent design is a failed strategy. It's a non-starter. It's not science. Yet, if we go back to the beginning of your presentation where you mentioned logical symmetries, that if it can be false, then it can hypothetically be true. That's just logically follows, right?
Right.
You can't have it both ways. You can't say it's failed and at the same time say you're not allowed to use this because it's not science. So we're in between a rock and a hard place, essentially.
Right. And again, this reverts to my principal objection, which is, if you're going to apply a rule, it ought to hold across the board. And if it doesn't, that's a rule that we should jettison. We'd be better off without it. And next time, I'm going to show by examples that, in fact, throughout the sciences, not just biology, but in many other fields, no one follows the rule. When do they apply it? They apply it when they want to slap down dissent or heterodoxy on the part of people like you or me, or Mike Behe. Pick your favorite crazy intelligent design person.
Yeah.
And very few things in this world bother me. I'm a pretty easygoing person. That really does bother me. Because it seems prima facie, not only prima facie, in in-depth analysis, it's unfair. The fascinating thing right now is Harvard, of all institutions, has undertaken what they call Project Galileo. I'll talk a lot more about this next time. The rationale of which is to sift astronomical data, where the data will be sifted into two bins: naturally caused, intelligently caused. This is being led by the astronomer Avi Lieb, and in a way that I never would have expected as a graduate student. Major institutions now, and the US government in its UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Project, is saying these are serious questions that require a methodology of design detection, basically. So I just got this. It's a monster book. Look how thick that is. Okay. It's by Lieb and another author, Life in the Cosmos. And what are they looking for? Technosignatures. Right? Why is a technosignature significant? because it's produced by a mind.
Yeah.
And this is the reason I had to split this talk into two, is there's so much interesting material to be covered.
Yeah.
You know, and plus I want the viewers to come back for really the cool stuff next time.
I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested in that. Thank you, Paul, for that fantastic presentation. I mean, essentially, the way I would describe it is that you're a freedom fighter trying to get us to be free of this epistemic cage, this, this bottom down explanation of everything being explained in
Bottom up.
yeah, sorry, bottom up. And essentially the epistemic freedom, when you get to see the world without the desert ontology, it's liberating. It's when you're talking about, okay, like say if I happen to not believe in God, I would still entertain the idea that perhaps there is something beyond the physical, because essentially, if we want to be academically honest, then no honest atheist naturalist would say naturalism is proven. Michael Roos, who is a proponent of Darwinism, a proponent of naturalism, he says it's an act of faith. So essentially, let's be intellectually honest about this and recognize on whichever side of the fence you are, there is an element of faith. It's more beneficial for science and beneficial for learning and the progress of humanity when we allow these options, rather than restricting people to these very reductionist accounts.
I agree, and I think it's profoundly dehumanizing to say to someone, any person, you aren't home, there's nobody here. Physics, right? I knock on your forehead. Hello, is anyone home? Nobody's home. Physics is running the show. I think you and I are alike in this, that even if I weren't a theist, I would want the intellectual freedom to say, what might there be in the universe? And each human being is precious, unique, and irreplaceable.
Yeah.
We are all unique agents. Give people back their agency, give them back their humanity, their creativity. I can tell you, I've discovered in interacting with atheists and agnostics that if they're really good at something, writing computer code or poetry or music or solving equations, pick some human creative activity, they are loath to give that up and turn it over to physics.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
They know just how hard it was to get that melody on a guitar to sound beautiful, or to have that poetry be arresting and powerful.
Yeah.
So they hang tightly onto their own creative agency because they know it's real. And I do think it's liberating to set people free from this kind of desert ontology that says you're nothing but physics in a meat machine, and say, no, you have unique, irreplaceable value.
Yeah, and I think one way of ending the stream is in the words of the late David Stowe, who I hope people are more get more familiar with his works. But one of the things he writes in Darwinian Fairy Tales is that Darwinism is a slander against humanity. Like there's no better way of